Is it possible to find relief?
It is for 10 seconds, and that's the whole trap of OCDs.
How do you get rid of OCD?
You can't get rid of it in the traditional sense.
What does an OCD attack feel like for you?
It's feeling like you're getting a call from the police saying that a loved one just has been shot and you're the one responsible. So a friend of mine recently went on radio talking about OCD. Before he went on, he was explicitly told to not talk about specific themes of OCD, for example, because it would be too intense for the general public to understand this. Who are you going to tell this to? To your wife? You're not going to tell her, so you keep it inside. You're not going to tell your friends because it's an extreme taboo topic. A lot of people struggle in silence, and also in the media, it's not really portrayed in the graphical sense that people experience it, right?
Welcome to Anxiety Fitness, where I'm finding out how to navigate anxiety by speaking to people with lived experience or professional insight. My name is Peter, and today I'll be talking to an expert by experience on the topic of OCD. Mourice Schuurmans is the founder of ObsessLess, an OCD companion app built from his own fight with severe OCD. After years of silent struggle, he's now helping others feel seen, supported, and less alone by creating the OCD community and support app he wished existed when he was first struggling with it. Let's begin. Maurice, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So I want to start off by asking you a few questions that my followers have provided, right? And the trick is, I'd love for you to answer them as short as you can while still answering the full question, if that makes any sense.
Makes total sense. I'll try to do my best.
Okay, so what is OCD?
OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. Many know it, especially from TV series. But in essence, it's intrusive thoughts, images, or urges that are super distressing and you find relief for. That's, I don't know, sorry for not giving the shortest answer, but that's...
No, I think that's a great answer, yeah. What's the difference between anxiety and OCD?
So there's a lot of overlap, and it used to be one and the same. So it used to be both anxiety disorders. But the difference really is that the intensity of OCD is way, way up compared to generalized anxiety. And it's usually as an effect of the intrusive thoughts, images, and urges somebody experience. Instead of a gradually build up, it can be all of a sudden and very, very intrusive.
I need to be clean. Is that OCD?
Well, it depends. So I need to be clean is something normal, right, in society. But if it's coming from an intrusive thought or some kind of urge to try to prevent a feeling, then it can be OCD. But if it's just about being clean, then I would say no.
This is an interesting one. What does an OCD attack feel like for you? Is that a thing?
Well, yes, it's feeling like you're getting a call from the police saying that a loved one just has been shot and you're the one responsible, I would say. And that over and over, multiple times a day. That's capturing it for me.
And how do you get rid of OCD?
You can't get rid of it in the traditional sense, but you can make your life manageable. So it's almost back to zero or in complete remission. How
do you know if you have OCD?
I'm not a professional, so I cannot elaborate on that. But I would say that, I mean, if you have suspicions about OCD, just go to your general practitioner and talk about your worries. Know that many people have these weird thoughts or weird feelings, and it's always good to talk to a professional about them and let them decide. But if you feel that there's something there, don't hesitate. No matter the taboo thoughts that are, ruling your life, just go to a professional. They will have seen it many, many times.
So those are some fantastic answers. So thank you for that. And I'd like to just know a bit more about how you have those answers. So what's your experience with OCD?
So let me first state that I'm not a professional psychologist by any means, but I come from lived experience. I've struggled with OCD for the last 8 years, and before that, undiagnosed OCD also ruled my life. And I've been in therapy for also almost 8 years. So during that period, I did a lot of research, of course, been through most of the treatments that are available. And of course, I'm building ObsessLess, which makes me talk to psychologists and psychiatrists now on an almost weekly basis, talking about OCD. That's my background on this.
So you mentioned that you struggled with undiagnosed OCD for a while. Can you tell us a bit more about your journey to getting diagnosed? How did that look like?
Yeah, so it's a very, very long story, but I'll try to keep it brief. So when I was a kid, always I had weird thoughts about if I think this, my parents will die, for example. And I had these nifty ideas of, okay, if I think this, just the other way around, then the thing I'm thinking won't happen because it's the other way around. And this was my childhood. And during that time, I was bullied quite extensively through all of my childhood. And I developed generalized anxiety disorder, which later manifested as a health anxiety. At least that's what I was treated for. And during my late teens, that became worse and worse and worse. I had more psychologists to see during that time. But it slowly developed into clinical OCD at around 25, 26. And then I was officially diagnosed with OCD. But in hindsight, it was always OCD, just always covered up as generalized anxiety disorder, health anxiety, stuff like that, because they never really went into the deep end until it was too late.
That's really interesting to me because it's kind of sounds like a similar story to me. I was diagnosed with first generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety as well, or social phobia, and health anxiety as well, and then all the way to panic disorder. So I've had quite a few diagnoses in my life, but never OCD. Now I can relate to things like intrusive thoughts, for example, and even the example you shared, if I don't do this, or if this happens, or then this will happen. I've had these kind of thoughts. So can you go a bit more into what's the difference there? How did you know that it was, or how did the doctors find out that, okay, this is OCD, this is more specific, or what's the difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it all comes down to the severity and the repetitions between those settings. So for me, of course, everybody has intrusive thoughts. Those are normal human behavior, but the intensity and duration of those usually determine if somebody has OCD or not. So anybody with an anxiety disorder can have intrusive thoughts, but OCD, it's multiple hours a day. You're ruminating, or you're trying to prevent certain things with rituals, and then you get to the clinical diagnosis of OCD. And now for me, I still have OCD on paper, but clinically not anymore, right? So it's all about the intensity and severity, and of course, who knows? Maybe you do have OCD on that end, but just not clinical, right? That can also be the case. Yeah.
The way I always described it is I definitely have some, for example, compulsions, or I have some kind of, rituals, perhaps. There's this thing where I've done it since I was really young, where when I breathe out, and I consciously am realizing it, I have to breathe out looking in the cracks of walls. I don't know if that makes any sense to anyone, but I have to breathe out into the crack and the corners. And the reason in my head is I'm letting go of bad stuff. And if I do it anywhere else, it can bounce around. And I know that's not true at all. And I know that's not something that means anything. And it's just quite silly or whatever. But it actually makes me feel physically better to do that. And there's a sense of if I don't do that, it's just not worth the risk. But I don't consider that to be OCD, but I would imagine that might be something that someone with OCD might relate to, but on a more intense level. Does
exactly.
That sound?
So actually, it almost feels like it's textbook OCD behavior. But of course, what happens when you don't do it? That's the question, then, right? And what's the feeling that you get, and can you live with that feeling? And for people with severe OCD, those feelings get hijacked in such an intense level that they have to do it. And not only that, the repetitive behaviors of safety behaviors need to be increased in order to feel the same level of security, right? Yeah. And what you've explained, you can keep doing this and it doesn't really increase in severity, but with somebody in OCD, it can increase quite rapidly, all to the point where they are completely debilitated in life, right? So
Exactly, yeah.
I would say it could be OCD, but I mean you can have moderate OCD or light OCD or stuff like that. But from a
I think that makes sense.
OCD,
It could be, but I think the main thing is I cannot do it. So now if I don't do it, I will not feel too uncomfortable. It'll be like, usually now that I'm consciously thinking about this is something that I just do like without thinking about it. But it's never been to the point where these things necessarily, it becomes really, really intense for me. But there are things like intrusive thoughts that have played a huge role in anxiety and even panic attacks for me. What form do intrusive thoughts usually come in relation to OCD?
So with OCD, it's ego dystonic, meaning that it attacks the values that you find very important, for example. So it could be you just became a father. Can I mention that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So congrats on that again.
Thank you. Yeah.
But it can be, for example, you have a newborn and you hold it in your hands and you all of a sudden have intrusive thoughts about maybe squishing its head in, right? Extremely graphic stuff. These take a hold in you and in your daily life. It's ego dystonic, meaning you don't want to do it, but you cannot do any safety behaviors because you just want to make sure, right? And that's how OCD, really manifests in some people. And it can be about extreme themes, right? It can be about pedophilia, something that's highly taboo. In some religious cultures, for example, homosexuality is a sin. You can have intrusive thoughts about those, being afraid that you're maybe homosexual, or it can be in a religion sense, right? That you are blasphemous. And rationally speaking, most people know that they're not, but they're not sure. And that what if? And that not being sure, that's the real catch with OCD, and it will always let on to that, and you will always try to find relief on that. What if?
Yeah, is it possible to find relief for these?
It is for 10 seconds, right? And that's the whole trap of OCD. So you can't find relief, right? You can ask your partner, "Hey, do you think I'm gay, or do you think I'm this?" Or you can ask your friends, and they will give you relief, but it will only last for 10 seconds or a minute or a day, and then the doubt will start creeping back in. And what if this guy lied, or what if my friend lied, or what if I'm secretly still hurting my child without me knowing? Those kinds of things will always come back. So it's very important with OCD to work on those doubts and really train the brain in seeing that it doesn't really matter what the thoughts are or the intrusive thoughts. The content it's more about how you deal with them.
I think that there can be a focus on these graphic things that, as you said, may be taboo. What do you know why these crop up and why these themes affect us so much?
So when I started having OCD, I was always quite obsessed with the fact that why do I have this, right? Or why specifically these themes? Or can I talk about this? Or is it a trauma that triggered all of this? And when you look at OCD treatments, it doesn't really matter what the cause is, and it doesn't really matter what the theme is. It's most always ego dystonic, meaning that it attacks the values you hold high. So looking for an answer that, why do I have this, is actually a compulsion, right? To find relief. Because if you can find the answer where it's coming from, you will find the source, and then you will know for sure that either you're crazy person or not, right? So this can be categorized as a compulsion. That's the answer, the best answer I can give on this subject.
For me, the intrusive thoughts specifically are something that I remember dealing with a lot when I was younger. And I had really weird graphic ones, and I even go into detail. I used to go in the kitchen, see a knife, and I used to think, okay, I'm gonna stab myself with the knife. I'm just curious to know what happens. Or there's this sensation that people have where if you're by a cliff, a lot of people get this, what if I just jumped off the cliff? And you actually feel the fear of, oh my goodness. And there is one intrusive thought recently that has really, really bothered me, even recently, right? And I had a little bit of a few weeks where I suddenly felt immense terror whenever I went to the tube, the underground, and stood on the platform, because it felt like, and I would imagine, just running and jumping in front of the train. Now, I don't have any feelings of wanting to harm myself. I think I have a good life. I'm very grateful. But I had this physical terror that, I'm going to jump in front. And I would vividly imagine it to the point where at points I had to hold my girlfriend's hand. I'd be like, I would take a step back. I'd be like, just take an extra step back. I'm going to sit down when the train comes. Because it felt like I was going to do it, even though I absolutely did not want to do it. So I think that's also another key point is people don't necessarily want, like, if you have a graphic thought, it does not mean that that's something that's within you or you want to happen. So I didn't want to stab myself. I didn't want to jump in front of a train. I didn't want to do any of these things, but it felt like there might be an urge. And I guess, is that something this is part of it, right?
So I cannot give you reassurance on this.
No reassurance. No, but just for the viewers understanding that this
for the
is...
viewers, yes, exactly. Yeah. So no, I mean, this can be textbook OCD, right? I mean, it's ego dystonic. You keep repeating, right? It's not me. I don't want to do these things, but still, I get these thoughts and these urges, and especially the urge makes it real, which gives me the anxiety. Right. Then I did a safety behavior, stepping back, asking my girlfriend, in essence, to keep me safe because you keep you hold her hand. So it's giving the reassurance to somebody near to you. And I mean, this is how OCD manifests, right? Not to scare you or anything, but this is usually how it starts, right? And it's completely normal to have intrusive thoughts, and most people have this. And especially if you're more prone to anxiety, for example, you feel those feelings more intense. But with OCD, it just latches on to another level, right? It's completely debilitating. It's repetitive. It starts with one, and then it slowly, gradually, takes over your complete life. So there can be definitely a case to be made that you experience some kind of OCD, right? And some kind of obsessive behavior on these themes. But then again, right? It's all about reaching a threshold where it's becoming clinically, marked as OCD. And just to mention again, having intrusive thoughts is completely normal as a human. It's just about how we respond to them that creates the problem.
And for me, so I'm glad to say I've been taking the train lots of times and I haven't been worrying about it so much. And I think part of it for me was remembering and reminding myself that intrusive thoughts can be quite a regular thing that happens. And again, my reaction to it. So I realized that me sitting down might actually just be confirming, or in my mind, confirming the idea of, because I sat down, I didn't jump. When actually I've been standing up now every time and I never jumped because I don't want to. Right? So I think that's something that really helps me with understanding like how intrusive thoughts may work. But in someone that's like clinically diagnosed with OCD, it may be a more difficult, the urges may be stronger, or may be more difficult to actually get to that point, whereas this only lasted for me for a few weeks. And sometimes it comes and goes. There'll be other things I worry about specifically, but typically I'm able to have that cycle of like, okay, I catch myself, right? But I can imagine it can be quite very, very intense. So as you see, there's a lot of overlap, or maybe I just have OCD, who knows? But definitely the concepts, there's a lot of shared things. And I guess up until recently, OCD was considered an anxiety disorder in the DSM until
exactly.
So definitely a lot of intertwined stuff there.
There is a lot of comorbidity with OCD, right? So with OCD, usually it's anxiety also as a comorbidity, and depression comes along with it. Sometimes even other comorbidities. It's a result of a lot of things combined, right? And we shouldn't forget that it's not only OCD you're struggling with if you go through these severe episodes of OCD.
And so you mentioned that you still have OCD, but you also how are you now? Like, how is your life going? Does OCD rule your does it rule your life?
No, not anymore. And I have to. There's a bit of there's two sides in the OCD community, right? There's people that say, for example, me, that OCD is chronic, and meaning, of course, that it's chronic, but it doesn't have to be constant, right? So that means that for me, it feels like I'm in remission, meaning I don't really am bothered by OCD anymore. Sometimes I have a couple of flare-ups, that's it. And on the other hand, there's also a community that says, well, OCD is not chronic because you can still heal from it, right? And I also support that. So it's all about finding your own compass in that sense, but realizing that OCD is highly treatable and highly recoverable. But it takes a lot of work and access to therapy and a lot of other sacrifices you have to make in order to get to a point where it can become bearable. And I feel that there is the real problem when it comes to OCD and overcoming it. It's lack of access to care and lack of access to professionals and lack of access to the right diagnosis, right? I mean, it took me, if you look at it, almost 20 years maybe to get properly diagnosed, and then almost 6 to 8 years to overcome it with almost weekly or bi-weekly therapy sessions. And that's not something everybody can afford or has access to.
Right. And that's why you're building ObsessLess, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I can tell a bit more about that. So ObsessLess is the solution I wish I had when I was first diagnosed. I had to wait 8 months to get therapy after my diagnosis, and I felt really, really alone, right? You're struggling with this alone, and you go Googling, you go on Reddit, you go on YouTube just to find some kind of an answer how to overcome this and how to cure this. And in a period, it felt really, really lonely, right? You're dealing with a mental illness that's heavily impacting your life and making your life smaller and smaller each day. And I was looking for somebody that understood what I was going through and could also help me. And that's what I'm building. I'm building an OCD companion that helps you go through these hard periods and helps you go through these hard times when facing OCD. And that's what ObsessLess is. It's a community plus a companion app that is going to be available for people with OCD.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And guys, if you're listening, you want to check it out, where can people find it?
ObsessLess.com or on my Instagram, ObsessLess Mourice. You can follow me and I'll share updates probably.
So speaking of your Instagram, so at ObsessLess Mourice, I follow you there, and I saw an interesting post that you put that seems to have gone quite viral. It was real OCD versus fake OCD. I'll probably put it up on the screen if we're on the video. Why did you make this, and why do you think it kind of resonated with people so much?
I think if you haven't experienced OCD in a severity that's portrayed in the media, right, it's hard to understand what OCD is. And I felt that in the media, and especially when talking to people on the streets about OCD, it always feels like this cute, quirky condition that's people with perfectionism, stuff like that. And this is not how I experience it, right? It's messy, it's terrifying, it's just extremely graphic at times, and I try to accompany that into my post. I think by trying to be vulnerable there and just saying how it is, right? It's a fucked up mental disorder, and I try to put that in the post, and I try to capture that into the real versus fake one. And I think this is how many people with OCD feel, right? It's that I even have to say it's real OCD instead of just OCD is I think proof enough that there's not a lot to be done with the awareness that we have to bring towards OCD.
I still hear that commonly from sometimes when I'm talking to people. Oh, I'm so OCD about this, I'm so OCD about that, and I hold my tongue because I'm not going to correct anyone. But maybe that's an anxiety thing, actually. But
I sure as hell don't. If people say really? That, I will point it out, and but in a respectful way, right? I don't mind people making mistakes at all. I mean, everybody has their own background, and I sure as hell don't want. And how can I say it? It's not a problem, but it's very important to speak up about this in a respectful manner, that you don't, fuck up the community by being angry, but being respectful and helping them understand what OCD is, right? And I always give them questions. So imagine getting a call right now that a loved one has died, and getting that call every 10 seconds. And that feeling is somebody that somebody with OCD has to face every day. And that's what they were dealing with, essentially. Yeah.
I do know people who've been clinically diagnosed with OCD, and the thing is, from outside, you would actually never know. So it's not necessarily, in their cases, it's not necessarily something that, oh, you see them cleaning all the time, so they have OCD and poor them, but also it's cute. It's, you actually would know, and in some cases they might not ever go in a situation where you might notice what they're worried about. Similar with anxiety as well. You might not notice someone has anxiety because they don't go to the place they're avoiding. And so it can be very, I think the media is presented very goofy in a sense, in a lot of times, but in real life it can just be totally silent. There's no indication necessarily, especially from the outside, that that person, or maybe, it's just, I understand the intensity of those, what's happening inside and physically as well, that it's not something that you can necessarily say, oh, look, that person is washing their hands 20 times. And even if they are doing that, because I know that could be a possibility as well, it's not just that you're washing your hands, is it? It's more than just, oh, I have to wash my hands. There's stuff happening, right, within your body. How do you explain that? Like, you did the great comparison of getting that phone call, but can you go deeper onto that feeling?
Yeah, maybe I can do one step back on and talk about maybe one of the reasons why in society it's still misunderstood, right? So a friend of mine recently went on radio talking about OCD, and before he went on, he was explicitly told to not talk about specific themes of OCD, for example, pedophilia OCD, because it would be too intense for the general public to understand this. But imagine you being just a father and, for example, changing your kid and having these pedophilia intrusive thoughts. Who are you going to tell this to? To your wife? You're afraid that you're a pedophile. You're not going to tell her, so you keep it inside. You're not going to tell your friends because it's an extreme taboo topic. And that's the whole reason why so many people struggle with this, because it's usually are extreme taboo themes that are highly ego-dystonic, meaning that in their society, their values are high, right? So a lot of people struggle in silence, and also in the media, it's not really portrayed in the graphical sense that people experience it, right? So if I tell people about this, I usually always like to talk about pedophilia OCD because it's the most graphic and taboo one, and it shocks people, and I think that's good. But it also sometimes comes with a lot of misunderstanding, right? People are like, only the word alone is reason enough to stop listening and just feel like, I don't want to be bothered with this, right? But
Absolutely.
People with OCD are bothered by this on a daily basis, and there should be a safe space for them to talk about this and not feel misunderstood or even puked out by society in some sense, right? Because people have struggled with this or misdiagnosed or stuff like that. So I just wanted to point it out, and I forgot about the last question. Yeah.
Don't worry, but it's obvious. So, for example, that's that example that pedophilia OCD. So for me, it's obvious that, the bit where people are going to get confused is they think, oh, that person has that type of OCD, therefore they are that, right? Yes. Is that what the misconception is?
It is, right? I mean, think about it. I have thoughts about fearing of doing this, right? And the fearing part is forgotten. The intrusive part is forgotten because you have thoughts about this. Thus, it must be egocentric. And this is usually what it is. When in psychology, right? In the past, it was always egocentric. We have to solve the egocentric part and about accepting that you might be, a pedophile. But this is not the case with OCD. It attacks it on an ego-dystonic level, meaning that you might have these thoughts about, intrusive thoughts, images about doing this stuff, but it highly, gives a lot of stress and a lot of terrifying feelings. So that alone is, indication of OCD. And people forget that because they don't have that experience on the inside, the terrifying feelings that come with it. They just hear the thoughts and they focus on that. But then again, that having said, if you talk to a professional specialized in OCD or a general practitioner, they will understand this. But in society, we still have to do a lot of work to talk about this openly, which I understand, right? I mean, it's not lightly, and it's been under the rug for so long, OCD, like true OCD, real OCD, that it's we're just catching up on this.
Okay, yeah, it's. I mean, the thing is, it covers. It's extremely, how do you say? As you said, taboo topics. It's very scary topics. The worst topics in our lives and society that people can imagine are people are dealing with thoughts around this and basically OCD around this, and that is absolutely terrifying. So where can people go, no matter what theme their OCD might be? Obviously, what is the first place people can go to if they don't feel like they can talk to friends and things like that?
That's a good question. So I will start with iocdf.org. It's the International OCD Organization. And from there, you can find resources on your local practitioners and maybe even specialists that can help you with this. If you're in high distress, go to your general practitioner and you can introduce your fears by saying, hey, I might suspect I have OCD. And then you don't have to talk specifically about your themes if you feel uncomfortable, but you can talk about the repetitive nature and the terrifying feelings you get from this. So you don't have to be explicit until you maybe find a professional that you feel comfortable with talking about this. For me, especially, it took me a couple of years to talk about some themes that I was struggling with because I was still fearful, even under professional care, to talk about this. So know that it's a gradual solution, and you have to work towards that recovery. But start with your general practitioner and introduce it as I might fear that I have OCD, and start from there and go from there. I think that's the best advice I can give.
No, I think that's great advice because, especially I can imagine people might maybe have some violent themes or taboo themes and worry even about talking to a professional.
Exactly.
Because they say, well, what if the professional confirms that I have this problem? Like, what if they tell me it's not OCD and I'm going to do this, one day.
Exactly.
So, but also it's good to know that you don't necessarily have to indulge in telling what it is right away to the professional, right? So I think with therapy, even for lots of different issues, people worry, I'm going to have to spill all my secrets, all my worst fears, or anything that's ever happened to me in life. I have to tell the therapist on day one, or else they're going to say they're not going to treat me, right? But it's a gradual process. So I think that hopefully could dispel some fears about actually getting that type of help, right? So yeah, that's a good. Thanks for sharing those sources. What's ERP?
ERP is exposure response prevention, and that is gradually exposing yourself to the fears that you're fearing, for example, and then practicing response prevention, meaning that you're changing the behavior that comes from this, trying to get relief from it and trying to change the response prevention that comes from this fear. And it's the gold standard in OCD care. So it's the most effective way of treating OCD at this point. That's what ERP is. Yeah.
Interesting. So can you give an example of like a simple...
Absolutely.
ERP technique, or not technique, but situation?
Yes. So it can be gradual, right? It can be imagining scenarios in your head and not going to any safety behaviors. So for me, for example, I had thoughts about harming people, even thoughts of like trying to get to the thoughts or think about them, about harming people was triggering for me. So for me, it started with writing down, for example, I'm gonna pick up a knife and I'm gonna walk towards my girlfriend. This can be an exposure response prevention exercise. And it can be, walking with a knife just in your hands, and then it will gradually increase your anxiety. And the whole thing about exposure response prevention is staying with that anxiety until it dies down. So your mind and brain starts to understand that, hey, I might be having intrusive thoughts and feelings, but it's nothing to fear to begin with, right? So it's about exposing yourself to those fears. And just as a side note, when I started with ERP and I heard the therapist say, well, we have to expose you to your worst fears, I thought about, okay, now I have to kill people, right? That's what she's saying. Yeah. What if I'm doing that? But it's more about getting used to the feeling that it invokes and trying to stick with that and trying to learn on an emotional level that there's nothing to fear with. And that takes time and gradual exposure. But then again, I am not a professional. So if you want to dive deep on this, talk to a professional specialized in ERP.
Yeah. But it's good to hear about your experience. So you've done this, and you just told me that you had thoughts of you had harming people, right? So that's interesting. The reason I'm picking up on that is I want to know, if you can, how long did it take you to get to the point of feeling comfortable to share that?
It took me a good year, I think, and it was by accident that I started talking about this. And I must say, some things I don't discuss still, right? So I would say it really depends on who you talk to, if they have the insights or the background to be able to understand this, right, on a certain level. And if I feel comfortable with a person talking about this, I'm not at a party and screaming, "Hey guys, I've got OCD and I had thoughts about stabbing people." That's not what I do. But if people are interested, they can know. And what I try to do with my socials is try to be open about my experience, so people feel less alone. Because I think having role models in the space, especially people that have kind of managed it, right, is something I wish I had when I was in the deep end of it.
Well, it's quite a brave thing, because I think that there's going to be people out there who maybe have a similar experience and have never heard anyone talk about it. So just the fact that you talk about that is good. But at the same time, it's not something that, in order to overcome it, you have to go and tell everyone, right? It's not like, hey, everyone, I have these fears and thoughts, and it's not that you have to do that. So I think it's just quite interesting in the sense that, okay, you're comfortable for some things in specific situations to share that, and the benefit may be there for other people as well. So I'm sure lots of people listening here are going to feel more like normalized and see lots of roots for hope and things like that. But that does lead me to, I'm going to use this example again. But you said you mentioned something about a knife and your girlfriend, right? How does your family, friends respond to your OCD? I assume they know about your OCD?
I would say my best friends know the real depth about my OCD, and also my now fiance knows about my OCD in great detail. But I would say my parents are still a bit dismissive about it. They don't really want to understand what it entails, because there's such a taboo on it. I try to make them understand. I even brought them to therapy a couple of times, but it was not successful in that sense. So it is really about trying to find people you can confide in, and people that you feel actually understand or want to understand. I think that's the most important. And you don't have to have everybody understand it, right? It's not about trying to change the world for everybody. It's about making small steps and sharing what you feel comfortable with. But I would say it's a hard condition to really, really explain well for people that don't have any experience in mental health or any background there or any struggles themselves, because it's such a taboo thing, and people don't really want to talk about taboo stuff, right? It's uncomfortable, it's hard. So I think I cannot blame my parents for not wanting to understand, but it can hurt sometimes if you feel misunderstood by the ones closest to you, but also by society as in general. Yeah.
So I dealt with that a lot too, of like having people who don't necessarily understand. And I get a lot of my followers ask me like, "Oh, my family member doesn't understand, and it really hurts. I feel angry. But my response, and this is something that really helped me to deal with that, is I am just so relieved that they don't understand because I care about them. I love them. I'm like, oh, I'm so relieved you don't get my panic attacks. Mm-hmm. Like, it's because those panic attacks are to me as if I am dying at the time. And it's like, oh, I've seen my life flash before my eyes loads of time. I don't want anyone else to experience that at all. They should only experience it once when they do die. So
hopefully not. If that's your end of life,
exactly. Hopefully not. Hopefully it's more peaceful like that. But maybe you have maybe you see a nice life flash before your eyes. But but for me, it's like, oh, thank goodness that people don't understand. So even when people online are telling me like rude things, lots of mean comments all the time, which is totally fine. I think like, well, I'm glad that person doesn't experience it, because I don't wish this on anyone, right? Mm-hmm. So that's something that just helps me to like deal with that and accept that as well.
Same for me. I must say, when I was younger, I was a lot colder and less empathic than I am right now, right? Because my mental illness, if you can call it that, really helped me see, that people can struggle even without you realizing, right? I mean, I looked great from the outside. I tried to keep my cool, but from the inside, I was dying every day. So if you went through a mental episode, I think you become more understanding about people's problems, no matter your background. And this is actually what I really, really like myself. I mean, silver lining, if you can call it that, is that no matter what your background, your beliefs, or whatever, it's universal experience that we're all going through, which we can connect over. And only people that have been through it, for example, anxiety or depression or OCD even, you speak a certain language which people just get, right? If I say, panic attack, I can understand the feeling and the way it invokes a terrifying feeling of dying. And just like you said, right, you don't wish it upon your worst enemies. And I think this is a good thing. Because if people really understood what a true panic attack was, or a terrifying terror attack, or OCD in general, I think they wouldn't last like half an hour. It would be categorized as a torture device that should be banned, by the Geneva Convention. So let's just
that would be. I used to think about that, like, what if there was a device that could give someone a panic attack just so they can see how it feels. So again, on this topic of friends and family, so this is something that actually, I want to cover more, that I always talk about. So you talked about your family and friends, who understands, who doesn't understand, but has your OCD affected your family in any way?
So for me, I was always very internally struggling, and I never really sought outward reassurance. But with some OCD types, you can, for example, relationship OCD, you will ask your significant other a lot of questions, and that can be reassurance seeking. So with OCD, everything can become a compulsion, and you have to be wary about that. So even reassurance seeking or sharing your story can become a compulsion to check if people, still accept you, for example, with some subsets of OCD. So it's always a question if, am I doing this because of my OCD, or am I doing this because I want to genuinely feel understood, or genuinely, want to share what I'm struggling with? And this is the hard part with OCD, because OCD hijacks, essentially your emotional regulation center. You don't really know what to trust anymore, and you have to find a new way of dealing with your emotions. At least that was my personal experience going through OCD.
Yeah, because for me with anxiety as well, it's mine that had a huge impact on my family. I was calling ambulances all the time, and it was, my dad was taking me to the hospital. I was having panic attacks all day, and it's just, there was no way I wasn't affecting everyone. But the same way, sometimes it can be very internalized as well. So, but I just like to cover that point to recognize how these things may affect people around us. So as you mentioned, relationship OCD, I can imagine might be put a lot of strain, and even could affect the mental health of the other person in the relationship. So I don't have any solutions, but I always just like to highlight that, just because for me it's I'm remembering that it actually helps me in a sense of with remembering why I work so hard. And it's not in the sense of, I'm a burden because I have anxiety, or I'm a burden because OCD, or anything like that. It's just kind of that feeling grateful for the people that stick around, and really putting myself in, okay, I understand my struggles, but I need to understand every aspect of it in my life. And it just makes it so much more, it makes me just realize even more than just my own effect of how serious what's going on is, and why it's so important that there's more help out there and things like that. But on that note, I guess there's probably the last question of and then we kind of can begin to wrap it up. But how can friends and family support someone with OCD? Are there any things that people do that actually might be making it worse? Are there things that, what can people do?
It's a hard question, because for every sub-theme, of course, there's a certain way of dealing with that as a partner, right? But usually it's not something partners or parents want to hear, because the natural instinct for people dealing with partners or spouses or children with OCD is to help them, right? And to give them comfort or try to make their life easier. So because they're already struggling enough. But with OCD, giving reassurance or making somebody's life easier is actually feeding the OCD by, for example, giving reassurance or, for example, doing tasks for them so they don't have to do it themselves, right? So how can you help somebody with OCD? First thing you can do is, if your partner or spouse or kid has access to therapy, go with them to the therapist and ask the therapist, hey, what can I do personally to help this specific theme with my significant other or whoever? And second is get educated on OCD. What are the triggers? How does it work? And third is, sit with people that have OCD, right? You cannot take their fears away. You cannot do their compulsions for them, but you can be with them when they do exposures, right? In the way that you're standing besides them and not behind or in front, but just being present and listening to your partner sometimes can be a good thing. But again, this can become a compulsion. So it's very important to learn about a specific theme that the person is struggling with and really talking to the professional that is trained in OCD to help you with good tips there. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's not one size fits all, as they say. So it's better, to learn from the actual person, from the people who are helping them, the professionals. That makes sense. Okay, so I think I've got most of my questions out, and I've read all the questions from my followers, but I do know that there are quite a few people who are looking forward to your event in my Anxiety Fitness community that's coming up on the 26th of June. And I know what you're thinking if you're listening, and this is the first time you've heard about this, but oh my God, not another anxiety support group. And I totally agree, because I've been in those and they always made me feel worse. There's so much triggering stuff, it's so much reassurance seeking, and by the end of it, look, I always just had to leave. But that's exactly why I made this community, because it takes all that away. It's a place where we share our wins in a way that encourages and inspires other members, and we do live talks with great people like Mourice. So Mourice, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about what you have planned.
First and foremost, I think you're doing great with the community, and I especially feel, just like you said, right, reassurance seeking and just shitty communities are all over. So I think I'm doing an amazing job there. But what I'm going to talk about is how to overcome the period between, diagnosis or therapy or not having access to therapy and still wanting to work on your OCD. That's what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And I already know some specific members. Hugo, if you're listening, I know you've been looking forward to this talk for a while, and it's finally happening. If you want to join the community, you can join at the link in the description if this is on YouTube. If you're listening anywhere else, wherever the links are, that's where it's going to be. Or you can go to anxietyfitness.com. You can join the community for £9.99 a month. That's less than a kind of unhealthy burger at some fancy restaurant, which I literally went to a restaurant the other day and the burger was literally like £15. It's ridiculous. But this is going to give you some amazing stuff, amazing talks, amazing workshops. We do Q&As all the time. And the features that I've built, I'm telling you, people love them and I really am proud of them. So come and join. 26th of June, the talk with Mourice, and there's going to be loads more going on. So can't wait to see you there. Mourice, I just want to say again, thank you so much for joining me in this podcast, my first episode. Technically, I did 2 episodes like 5 years ago, but I think I'm starting fresh. This is the first episode. I'm starting fresh, but everything that you've said, it's all like extremely valuable stuff. I think it's really a great thing that you're doing, sharing your experience, like your lived experience, in a way that's actually going to help people and building something as useful and great as ObsessLess and the app and the community that you're working on. So that's really great. And again, if you want to find it, it's ObsessLess.com, or you can visit at Mourice_ObsessLess.
Almost. So it's ObsessLess Mourice.
At ObsessLess _Mourice on Instagram.
Exactly. And on TikTok. all the socials.
On TikTok, yeah. Sometimes I forget about TikTok sometimes. But yeah, fantastic. That's all I have to say. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much again. And I'll see everyone listening or watching at the next episode.